explanation after our phone call with Dr. Ayman Nuruddin earlier. What is a vector vaccine?
Okay. First, I mentioned a viral vaccine. Virus vaccine is introducing the virus, but in two types. Either it is dead virus, okay, or live attenuated virus. It's live virus, but we removed the pathogenic part of that virus, okay. This is the first type. Second type, the vector vaccine. For example, COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 has a protein which is S-spike protein that which is immunogenic, that stimulate our immune system. So they remove the gene which is responsible for that protein, and they put this protein inside a non-infectious virus, okay? This technique is used in AstraZeneca vaccine, for example.
Which had side effects, that's why they stopped it first.
Yes, but the technique is not, was used and it is commonly used in the field of vaccines. The adenovirus vaccine, which is vaccine that is non-infectious to the human, okay, and when this vaccine enters the cell, they makes a copy of the protein, of the S-spike protein, and induce the immunity.
There are countries that announced that they entered the third phase of COVID-19. Here in Egypt, the
third wave,
the second wave is starting.
Yes.
According to the Presidential Advisor for Health and Prevention Affairs, Dr. Mohammed Awad Taghiddin, he said Egypt is entering the second phase, the second wave of COVID-19. What should we look for?
We should look for that this wave is different from the first wave. Because the first wave started in last March, which is the beginning of the spring, and ended in August. It ended in the summer, but this one will start in the winter, okay, or on the autumn, and will end. It will last for a long time. It will be longer. It may extend to next August, because there is other viruses we face in the winter, like the flu virus vaccine, the flu virus, okay. So we have to take care of this in this way.
So our precautionary measures should continue as is here in Egypt or anywhere in the world.
Yeah, even after getting the vaccine, even after, because we have to know that the vaccine will not prevent infection with COVID-19.
So if a person takes the vaccine, he is still prone to being infected with COVID-19.
Exactly.
So what's the benefit of taking the vaccine?
Like the benefit of taking flu virus vaccine. Exactly.
So it's a milder infection.
It's milder infection. The period or the duration of infection will be
decrease.
Will decrease, yes. So it will not prevent you from catching COVID-19, but it will lessen the symptoms, okay, and will decrease the morbidity and mortality rates for this COVID-19
So
infection.
basically turning it into another flu.
Exactly. And it
another severe flu.
Another severe flu. Anyway, after this wave, after the second wave, there will be a third wave for this virus, okay? And at the third wave, the virus will be like the flu, exactly like the flu, because the virus will be much more weak from the replication from a person to another, and by time this virus will become weak.
There are a number of vaccines, and you mentioned earlier that there are the top 10. One of the top 10 is the Chinese, another is the Russian, a third is the American and the German, and so on. Yet the Russians were the first to come up with the vaccine, to announce coming up with a vaccine that they started approving, if you will. But there seems to be lack of information in that regard.
Yes, there is a lack of information about the Russian vaccine, and it was highly criticized for this point. But finally, they declared that the efficacy of that vaccine reached 91%. Okay, and the technique of this vaccine is, as I said, viral vaccine. It is adenovirus vaccine, but with the protein of coronavirus inside this virus. So it's a commonly used technique.
What about the Chinese one, the Sinopharm vaccine?
The same technique
as the Russian
Russian one, yeah.
What's the difference between, the major difference between those kinds of vaccines and the one that is being used in England, for example, or in the US?
Pfizer, you mean Pfizer?
Right.
Okay. This one is nucleic acid vaccine, which is DNA, the DNA or the mRNA of the vaccine will be entered inside the cell. Okay, this type of vaccines was not used before in the field of vaccine. This is a new technique. This is injecting the genetic material of the virus inside the human cell. So we don't know that
to provoke the internal immunity, the immune system?
The immune system. This technique was used before in the cancer treatment.
Right.
But it's
which so far has not proven
totally
total
new
efficacy
for the field of vaccination.
All right. Let's take a call. We're joined by our guest, Professor Dr. Islam Anan, Professor of Pharmacology and Pandemics. Dr. Islam, a pleasure to have you on the show here tonight. Let's start with the second wave that we have entered into here in Egypt. What would you say needs to be done on the part of the decision makers and on the part of the people at this stage?
Perfect. So first, good evening, and good evening to your guests and the viewers. So you've tackled a very important point. So to end any pandemic, as we know, we do have 4 different scenarios. It's whether the virus will just fade away on its own, and that happened with SARS, for example, and MERS, or to have an efficacious and effective treatment, and so far we don't have something like this. And third one is to close the circuit between any infected and a healthy individual by lockdown, and by experience we figured that the world will not going to be able to make a total lockdown. So we'll end up with the 4th scenario, which is to have a good vaccine that we can actually provide to the people. So since we do have only 4 options, we do have first part, which is like 50% on the government and the healthcare policy and strategy itself, which is to provide better capacity in terms of hospitals, more ICU beds, try to purchase as much possible from the PPEs and supplies, the protocols and so on. And that's actually what was done during the preparation phase of the second wave. We all know now that we do have a special authorization, the Unified Purchase Authorization, that purchased already all the supplies for wave 2. So we are well acquainted with what to purchase and what to get, especially from the treatment protocols, because currently we do know the protocol that we're going to use. If you remember at the beginning of wave 1, we couldn't identify exactly which protocol to follow. 1 month we do have dexamethasone, hydroxychloroquine, is it good, is it bad, remdesivir, favipiravir, and so on. We do have an identified good protocols right now. So that's the first part. And actually the second part, which is very important, is to have a good awareness among us that second wave is as strong as wave 1. We need to follow the measures. We need to wear our masks. We need to make sure that we do have the social distancing and that we are following the precautions, and we are convinced. And I'm going to stress very fast regarding the awareness campaigns, and it's actually common between the government, authorities, and the individuals, is I guess we need, prior to the awareness campaigns, to have a buy-in campaigns to convince people, because if we are teaching people how to wear masks and how to behave and not to be in a crowded places, first we need to convince them, and I can see from people around me that we need to convince that the virus is still vicious, transmission is not that easy, the virus does exist, it's not the end. We're going to spend the winter without a vaccine because most probably the vaccine will arrive for a full amount that's going to cover like 20% or 30% of injections by end of quarter 1 of 2021 or quarter 2. So it's a common responsibility, as you mentioned exactly, between the authorities and the individuals. It's a common thing that we need to follow.
All right. Now, you said one of the things you mentioned is the awareness campaign. We all know what has been done in terms of awareness, either on television stations, on radio stations, yet there seems to be a certain reaction from the people not wanting to believe or not wanting to adhere to the precautionary measures. This we see, as you mentioned, in your circles, in my circles, I believe in your circles as well. We know a lot of people that still are not convinced of the precautionary measures that should be used. When you walk in the streets, you have this issue. When you look at people in, or when you ride public transportation, you still face this issue. Are we in a situation where there should be more forcefulness in terms of imposing the face masks, in terms of imposing certain sanitation measures in public areas?
That's a point. And I guess we have two things here. The first is to have better legislations and laws to enforce and impose the mask wearing among individuals to, for example, apply the rule of 6, like the United Kingdom, where people are not allowed to be in gatherings more than 6 individuals in one place. And the second point, I guess we need to focus more in a buy-in campaign and in convincing awareness campaigns, because, you know, awareness is not only one phase. First, there's a buy-in phase, then there is an awareness phase, and then there is an educational phase. We are focusing more on the educational phase to teach people how to wear masks, how to behave in gatherings. But actually, we need to make a step prior to that, which is to convince them, as you said exactly, and to establish a good scientific awareness about how the virus is actually spreading, to make testimonials from recovered patients to tell their stories so people can actually see that the treatment is not that easy, the disease is not that easy.
Let me conclude with you and with Dr. Donia on another note. Should the awareness be part of the new generation's education? Is this going to be our new way of life, and we should be prepared? If not our generation, then the new generation, we should prepare them for the new way of life that is to come?
Definitely, I totally agree. And I guess it started already at schools, and they are trying to make the students, the pupils, more aware about what's going on and what's the new sanitation guidelines, and how we can apply better measurements and better rules for actually keeping our hygiene in a better shape. So yes, I guess it's very good that we can actually apply some new amendments and reforms in the educational system to include in the curriculums public health. If we can teach our students at school level some public health rules, I guess we can avoid a lot of future hazards, and because it's not going to be the last disease that we're going to face. I hope it will be the last pandemic, but definitely it's not going to be the last disease or virus. So we need to be prepared. We couldn't mitigate the current pandemic, but I guess we can mitigate the future one.
Dr. Islam Anan, Professor of Pharmacology and Pandemics, thank you very much for joining us here. Dr. Donia, let me wrap up with you. In the late 90s, that was my first trip to Japan. Oh. And I was walking in the streets, and I would see these people walking in the street wearing a face mask.
Yeah.
So I was curious, because I've never seen this in my country or in other developed countries, in the US, in Europe and so on. So I asked, why are they wearing masks? They said, well, they have the flu. And here's, if you have a flu, then you wear a mask. So it's part of the culture. Are we in a situation now where if our generation is not going to adhere with this new way of life 100%, maybe we should focus on the new generation, the education of the new generation, the new way of life? How do we protect ourselves in the future?
Yes, it's a very important point that we should educate the new generation about these issues, about this preventive measurement. We shouldn't wait for the pandemic or for the disaster to occur, and then we see how to manage or how to mitigate this situation.
So we should take the lead with the new generation.
Yes.
All right. Is Egypt close to announcing a new vaccine?
The vaccine of the National Research Center.
Right.
Okay. The National Research Center is working in 3 different disciplines. First one, the vaccine. The National Research Center already created or invented 4 vaccines, but one of them has passed all the preclinical studies and now got the approval for the phase 1 clinical trials. The second discipline is antiviral drugs from natural products. We have 4 promising antiviral drugs, but they are now under clinical trials. Okay. The third one is to find a diagnostic kit, a simple and cheap diagnostic kit for the COVID-19 infection.
So instead of the
PCR, yes, yes.
A cheaper
and
a cheaper kit, so as to have more people check if they have the virus or not.
Or not, yes.
And to have a clearer idea of how many people are really infected in any place.
To get the good statistics and to know more about the number of infected people, yes, it will help.
So if you had countries or companies, pharmaceutical companies, that shrunk the period, the vaccine discovery period from 10 years to 10 months, when do you expect Egypt to have this hopefully new vaccine?
I think I cannot foretell, but I think it will take another 1 year, okay, to perform phase 2 and 3 clinical trials. Okay, so I think it will take another year.
Dr. Donia Sheir, Professor of Microbiology, Immunology and Nutrition at the National Research Center. Thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you. It was also a pleasure having our guests, Dr. Ayman Noureddin and Dr. Islam Anan. I'm Ayman Salah, sitting in for Dina Osman, and this was To The Point.